She stood at the gate of the Bellamy estate and said the most reasonable thing a person could say.
Excuse me, I'm a physician. I believe I can help your patient.
The security guard looked her up and down. The torn olive coat, the worn shoes, the dark skin,
A physician?
and laughed.
You smell like a dumpster.
Dr. Garrison Caldwell, the lead specialist, stepped outside and didn't even let her
Get this filthy
finish.
creature off my property! We don't take consultations from homeless beggars.
He turned to the guards.
If she opens her mouth again, call the police!
Two staffers pulled out their phones, filming. Someone whispered, "Is she
Is
crazy?"
she crazy?
No one, not a single soul, said a word in her defense. But not one of them could have imagined what was about to happen. Because by sunrise, every person who laughed would be on their knees, begging this woman for forgiveness. Man, they really turned her away like that? Let's see what happens. 36 hours earlier, the Bellamy estate sat on a gated hilltop in Beverly Hills, like a monument to everything money could buy. 34,000 square feet of Mediterranean Revival architecture, imported olive trees lining a quarter-mile driveway, and a private medical wing that rivaled the obstetric floor of Cedars-Sinai. Ted Bellamy had built this wing for one reason. His wife, Vivian Ashford Bellamy, was carrying twins, her first pregnancy after 6 years of failed fertility treatments. And he would not trust her life to a public hospital where ordinary people waited in plastic chairs. Ted was a self-made tech billionaire, mid-50s, the kind of man who solved problems by throwing money at them until they surrendered. He had flown in specialists from New York, Boston, Houston, and London. He had assembled a team of 12 board-certified obstetricians, each hand-picked by Dr. Garrison Caldwell, the most expensive OB/GYN in Los Angeles. Caldwell charged $250,000 per delivery. His waiting list stretched 18 months. His reputation was built not on outcomes, but on exclusivity. The right patients, the right zip codes, the right skin color, though he would never say that part aloud. Vivian lay in her suite, a lavish room converted into a hospital-grade monitoring station with dual fetal heart monitors, an ultrasound console, and an IV pole draped with magnesium sulfate. She was 34 weeks along, beautiful, exhausted, and terrified. Her condition had a name most people could not pronounce: vasa previa, with velamentous cord insertion. It meant the blood vessels connecting her twins to the placenta were running unprotected through the membranes, stretched directly across the cervical opening like a tripwire. One wrong move during delivery, a single rupture, and both babies would bleed out in under 4 minutes. The 12 finest doctors in the country knew this, and not one of them had a plan that guaranteed survival. Ted stood in his study that evening, phone pressed to his ear, barking at someone on the other end. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to charter a plane at midnight. I care that she walks out of that room alive with both my children." He hung up. He poured a scotch. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city lights below. And for the first time in his life, Theodore Bellamy understood that there were things his money could not fix. 6 blocks down the hill, beneath a concrete overpass where the sound of luxury SUVs hummed overhead like mechanical lullabies, a woman named Brenda Underwood sat on a folded blanket. Around her, a shopping cart holding everything she owned, a plastic water jug, a battery-powered lantern casting a small circle of amber light. She was black, late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and hands that were weathered but unnervingly steady. The hands of someone who had held life between her fingers 10,000 times. She opened a leather-bound journal. Its cover was soft from years of use, stitched by hand, the edges darkened with age. Inside, page after page of anatomical diagrams drawn in blue and red ink, cross-sections of placental vessels, uterine wall measurements, annotations in English, Swahili, and French, case notes, patient names, dates spanning 2 decades, and tucked into the back cover, a single photograph. A younger Brenda, in full surgical scrubs, standing with her medical team in front of a sign that read, Nairobi Continental Medical Institute, Department of Obstetric Surgery. 15 years ago, Dr. Brenda Underwood had been chief of obstetric surgery at that institute. She had developed a revolutionary technique for emergency cesarean deliveries in cases exactly like Vivian's. A technique that had saved hundreds of lives across sub-Saharan Africa and was taught in obstetric programs in 14 countries. When she emigrated to the United States, she carried 3 decades of surgical excellence, peer-reviewed publications, and a WHO commendation. She presented them to the California Medical Board, then to New York, then to Texas. Every single application was denied, lost, returned, rejected for incompatible training standards. She watched white colleagues with half her experience and a fraction of her published work receive their licenses within months. She spent her savings on attorneys. She lost her apartment, then her car, then her dignity in the eyes of a system that looked at her black skin and foreign credentials and saw nothing worth recognizing. But every night, under that overpass, she still opened her journal. She still traced the diagrams with her fingertip, because the knowledge never left her hands. She closed the journal, slipped it into her satchel, and looked up at the glow of the Bellamy estate on the hilltop above. She did not know what was happening inside those walls. Not yet. But that distance, 6 blocks between a mansion and an overpass, between $3.8 million and nothing, was about to collapse. The next morning, Brenda walked along the service road behind the Bellamy estate, the same path she took 3 times a week to reach a water spigot on an adjacent property. The sun was barely up. The air smelled of jasmine from the estate's gardens, a scent that drifted over the wall like a taunt, perfuming a world she was not allowed to enter. A supply van pulled up to the rear gate. The driver, a middle-aged man named Eddie, who delivered medical equipment to half the private clinics in Beverly Hills, recognized her. "Hey, Doc," he said casually. Some of the local workers knew fragments of Brenda's story, enough to call her that, not enough to change anything. He mentioned that the estate was crawling with doctors because the billionaire's wife was having a complicated pregnancy. Something about blood vessels near the babies. He didn't know the details. He didn't need to. Brenda knew. The moment he said blood vessels near the babies, her mind assembled the clinical picture with the precision of a machine built for exactly this purpose. Vasa previa, possibly velamentous insertion, twin gestation. She had seen this before. Not once, not twice, but 31 times across operating tables in Nairobi, Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and Kinshasa. She had written the protocol. She had invented the surgical technique. She had trained an entire generation of East African obstetricians to perform it. She walked to the service gate. She pressed the intercom. A security guard named Hayes appeared on the other side. Tall, thick-necked, the kind of man hired to keep the world's problems on the correct side of a fence. "Excuse me," Brenda said. Her voice was calm, measured, respectful. "I'm a physician. I have extensive experience with Vasa previa deliveries. I'd like to offer my assistance to the medical team." Hayes looked at her. His eyes traveled from her face to her coat, to her shoes, to the shopping cart visible 50 yards down the road. His expression did not change. He pressed his radio. "Got a woman at the service gate, says she's a doctor, wants to help." A pause. Static. Then a voice on the other end, clipped and dismissive. "No unauthorized personnel. Get rid of her." Hayes shrugged. "You heard it, ma'am. Move along." Brenda did not move along. She waited. She stood at that gate for over an hour in the morning sun, her satchel over her shoulder, her hands clasped in front of her, patient and still as a statue. Staff members passed on the other side of the fence. Some glanced at her. Most didn't. She was invisible, a black woman in worn clothing standing outside a rich man's gate. The world had trained them not to see her. Then the gate opened. Dr. Garrison Caldwell stepped out with two colleagues, Dr. Morris and Dr. Feldstein, stretching their legs after a long night of consultations. Caldwell wore custom-tailored scrubs with his initials monogrammed on the chest. His silver hair was immaculate. He carried a cup of coffee that probably cost more than everything Brenda owned. Brenda stepped forward. "Dr. Caldwell, I understand you're managing a vasa previa case with velamentous cord insertion in a twin pregnancy. I've performed 31 successful deliveries with this exact complication. I believe I can help." Caldwell stopped walking. He turned slowly. He looked at Brenda the way a man looks at a stain on his shoe. "I'm sorry," he said, though his voice carried no apology. "Did you just say you're a doctor?" He let the silence hang. Then he smiled, not with warmth, but with the particular cruelty of a man who enjoyed the distance between himself and everyone below him. "Sweetheart, I've been delivering babies for 22 years at the finest hospitals in this country. I have 12 board-certified specialists inside that house. And you," he gestured at her with his coffee cup, a lazy wave that encompassed her coat, her skin, her existence. "You want me to believe that a homeless black woman who can barely afford a bar of soap is going to walk in there and teach us something?" Dr. Feldstein laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, open laugh, the kind that invited others to join. Dr. Morris looked away, but said nothing. A groundskeeper, pruning roses near the gate, paused and stared. Two members of the household staff appeared at a window. One pulled out a phone and began recording. Caldwell wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the gate, close enough that Brenda could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and contempt. "Let me make this very clear. You are not a doctor. You are not a consultant. You are a vagrant who wandered up from whatever hole you crawled out of. And if you don't remove yourself in the next 30 seconds, I will have you arrested. Is that simple enough for you?" Brenda did not flinch. She held his gaze with a steadiness that unsettled him for half a second, though he would never admit it. "The velamentous insertion means the fetal vessels are running through the membranes without Wharton's jelly protection," she said quietly. "If your team attempts to rupture membranes or induce labor, those vessels will shear and both babies will exsanguinate in under 4 minutes. You need shut your mouth and get off this property." Caldwell's voice was ice. He turned to Hayes. "Remove her. And if she comes back, call the police. I don't have time for delusional street people." Hayes took Brenda by the arm, not gently, and walked her away from the gate. Behind her, she heard Feldstein say to Caldwell, loud enough to carry, "Can you believe that? A homeless woman trying to lecture Garrison Caldwell. What's next? A janitor performing brain surgery?" More laughter. Someone at the window was still filming. Brenda walked back toward the overpass. Her steps were steady, her face was composed, but inside her chest something burned. Not shame, because she had nothing to be ashamed of, but the old familiar fire of being erased, of having everything she was. Every life she had saved, every hand she had steadied, every child she had brought screaming into the world, reduced to the color of her skin and the condition of her coat. She reached her blanket beneath the overpass. She sat down. She opened her satchel and pulled out the leather journal. She held it against her chest, the way a mother holds a child, tightly, protectively, as if the world might try to take this from her too. Man, this part right here, it hits different. She literally created the whole procedure. And dude just told her to shut up 'cause she's black and broke. Like, you know the answer and they won't even let you talk? That's crazy. Imagine being her. Just imagine. And inside the Bellamy estate, behind those pristine walls and 12 useless degrees, Vivian Ashford Bellamy's heart monitor had just begun to scream. The screaming started at 11:47 p.m. Not Vivian's screaming. She was beyond that now, her body trembling under contractions that had come 6 weeks too early. The screaming belonged to the machines. Dual fetal heart monitors erupted in sharp, relentless alarms. Twin A's heart rate plummeted to 82. Twin B dropped to 70. The numbers fell like a countdown to something no one in that room wanted to name. Caldwell rushed into operating suite A, his team behind him. Gloves snapped, orders overlapped. Full ultrasound sweep, now. Prep magnesium bolus. Where's the cross-match? The room moved with the organized chaos of a dozen specialists doing everything they had been taught. But the ultrasound told a story none of them had rehearsed. The fetal vessels belonging to Twin B had migrated during contractions, splaying directly across the cervical os like glass threads stretched over an open drain. Any incision in the standard low transverse approach would sever those vessels instantly. Twin B would bleed out before the scalpel was clean. And that hemorrhage could trigger a cascade that would kill Twin A and Vivian with it. Caldwell stared at the screen. He called for additional imaging. He consulted specialists by phone. Boston, London, Mayo Clinic. Each conversation ended the same way. Silence. Then some version of, "I've never seen mapping this complex." He tried repositioning Vivienne. He tried a manual external version to shift Twin B. Nothing changed. The vessels would not move. The clock would not stop. At 1:15 a.m., standing in the corridor outside the suite, Caldwell said the words no specialist should ever have to say. He said them quietly, to Dr. Morris, not realizing the observation window was open and Ted Bellamy was standing 6 feet away. "I don't know where to cut." Ted heard every word. Behind the glass, his wife lay pale and shaking, connected to machines that beeped faster every minute. 12 doctors, the best money could buy, and not one could promise she would survive the night. His phone buzzed. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the name, Colleen Dwyer, the veteran labor nurse he had hired 8 months ago, the one staff member present for every consultation, every scan, every argument. Her voice was low, urgent, barely a whisper, the voice of someone about to cross a line who had decided to cross it anyway. "Mr. Bellamy, that woman who came to the gate this morning, I heard every word she said to Dr. Caldwell. She described your wife's condition with more precision than anyone on this team." She named the vessel positions before we ran the second ultrasound. "I've been a labor nurse 28 years. I know the difference between a crazy person and a doctor. That woman is a doctor." Ted closed his eyes. The hallway hummed with fluorescent light and the distant rhythm of monitors. He had spent his career making decisions with incomplete data, billion-dollar bets on technology that didn't exist yet. But none of those decisions had ever felt like this. He hung up. He walked past the marble foyer, past the Monet, past security. He got into his Bentley and drove 6 blocks down the hill to the overpass. He found Brenda on her blanket, lantern glowing amber beside her, the leather journal open on her knees. She was studying a diagram, the same one she had drawn 20 years ago in Nairobi, mapping the exact vascular pattern now threatening to kill his wife and children. Ted stood over her. His voice cracked on the first word. My wife is dying. My babies are dying. 12 doctors can't save them. A nurse told me you can. He paused. Every instinct built by wealth and privilege told him this was insane. He said it anyway. Can you help them? Brenda looked up. She studied his face, the red eyes, the loosened tie, the stripped-away arrogance, the raw humanity of a man who had run out of everything except hope. She closed her journal. She stood. Take me to her. 3 words, and with them, the longest night of Ted Bellamy's life split in 2. Everything before this moment, and everything after. Brenda walked through the front doors of the Bellamy estate and said nothing. The marble floors gleamed. A crystal chandelier scattered light across a foyer that was larger than every place she had slept in the past 5 years combined. A Monet hung on the wall to her left. She recognized it, a water lily study, probably worth 8 figures. Staff members froze as she passed. A maid holding fresh linens pressed herself against the wall. A security guard reached for his radio, but Ted shook his head once and the hand dropped. She did not gawk. She did not slow down. She walked with the satchel over her shoulder and her eyes locked forward, the way a surgeon walks toward an operating room. Because that is exactly what she was doing, even if no one in this house believed it yet. They reached the medical wing. The double doors opened, and there stood Garrison Caldwell, blocking the corridor like a man defending a castle that was already on fire. Absolutely not. His face twisted the moment he saw her. Mr. Bellamy, have you lost your mind? You brought this person into a sterile medical environment? I will not operate alongside a homeless woman who has no license, no credentials, and no business being within a mile of a patient. Ted stopped walking. He turned to Caldwell with a calm that was more dangerous than any shout. Dr. Caldwell, 20 minutes ago you told Dr. Morris, in front of an open window, that you don't know where to cut. My wife is hemorrhaging. My children are dying. You have no solution. So either step aside and let this woman try, or pack your bag and leave. If I leave, my entire team leaves with me. Then leave. But if my wife dies while your ego is walking out that door, I will spend every dollar I have making sure the world knows exactly who abandoned her. Every news outlet, every medical journal, every malpractice attorney in California. Your choice, doctor. You have 10 seconds. Caldwell's mouth opened, closed. He looked at his colleagues. Dr. Morris stared at the floor. Dr. Feldstein studied the ceiling. No one backed him up. No one said a word. The man she lathered from fingertips to elbows in the 30-second surgical scrub pattern that is identical in every hospital on Earth, from Cedars-Sinai to a field clinic in the Congo. Nurse Colleen Dwyer watched from 3 feet away. She had seen 10,000 surgeons wash their hands. She knew instantly, by the angle of the wrists, by the count, by the economy of movement, that she was watching a real one. Brenda dried her hands, gloved up, entered the suite. The 12 specialists were arranged around the room like spectators at a trial, arms crossed, skeptical, waiting for her to fail. She ignored them. She walked directly to the ultrasound console, studied the screen for 90 seconds without speaking, then began pointing to specific structures with a gloved finger. The anterior placental vessels have migrated to the lower uterine segment. This branch, here, is the feeding artery for twin B. It's crossing the internal os at 7 o'clock. If you incise within 2 centimeters of this vessel, it ruptures, and you lose both babies in under 4 minutes. She traced a path on the screen. You need to go higher and lateral. A modified fundal approach with continuous Doppler guidance. You map the vascular field in real time, you identify the safe corridor, and you deliver through the fundus, not the lower segment. Silence. Absolute silence. The kind that falls over a room when something shifts beneath the surface, and everyone feels it, but no one wants to be the first to speak. Dr. Morris broke it. He leaned toward the screen, studied the vessel she had indicated, and whispered to his colleague, "She's right. That's exactly where it is. How did she see that in 90 seconds? Caldwell's voice cut from the back of the room, sharp and defensive. A modified fundal approach is experimental. It is not standard of care in the United States. No American hospital would authorize that procedure. Brenda turned to face him. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It carried the weight of 3 decades, 31 surgeries, 2,000 deliveries, and 15 years of being told she was nothing. It is not standard in the United States because the United States did not develop it. I did. 31 cases, 94% survival. Published in the East African Journal of Obstetric Surgery 2006. Replicated in Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and Johannesburg. Referenced in the WHO Emergency Obstetric Care Manual, 3rd edition. The technique is called the Underwood maneuver. The name detonated in the room like a grenade with a delayed fuse. Doctor Ruth Evanston, the retired Johns Hopkins consultant, the quietest person in the room, the woman who had spent 30 years teaching residents and had read more obstetric literature than anyone present, stepped forward from the corner where she had been observing. Her eyes were wide. "The Underwood maneuver," she repeated slowly. "I've taught that technique to my residents. It's in 3 textbooks. I assigned the original paper every semester for a decade." She paused. She looked at Brenda, really looked at her, past the scrubs that didn't fit, past the hands that were weathered, past everything that didn't matter, and saw what no one else in that room had been willing to see. Underwood. She said the name again, quieter this time. Not a question, a recognition. "You're her." Brenda said nothing. She didn't need to. The name hung in the air, settling over Caldwell and his team like ash after an explosion. Phones came out. Fingers typed. The East African Journal of Obstetric Surgery. The WHO Commendation. Conference Proceedings from Nairobi, 2008. A photograph. The same photograph tucked into the back of Brenda's leather journal. Of a younger woman in surgical scrubs, standing proud in front of a sign that read, Nairobi Continental Medical Institute. The homeless woman they had mocked, filmed, and threatened with arrest was the author of the technique they had studied in medical school. And right now, she was the only person in this building who could save Vivian Bellamy's life. The room cracked open like a fault line. Dr. Evanston crossed the operating suite and stopped in front of Brenda. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "Are you Dr. Brenda Underwood? Chief of Obstetric Surgery, Nairobi Continental Medical Institute? The author of the vascular mapping protocol published in 2006? Brenda reached into the satchel she had carried from the overpass, through the security gate, past the marble foyer and into this room that smelled of antiseptic and arrogance. She pulled out the leather journal. She opened it, not to a random page, but to a specific one, the way a priest opens a Bible to a verse he has read 10,000 times. The page showed a hand-drawn diagram, a modified fundal incision mapped against a vascular field, annotated with Doppler coordinates in 3 colors of ink: blue for arteries, red for veins, black for the safe corridor. Beneath the diagram, handwritten notes in English, Swahili, and French. Case number, patient initials, date. Outcome, mother and child survived. She turned to another page, and another. 31 cases, 31 diagrams, 31 mothers who had walked out of her operating room alive because of the hands now holding this journal. Then she turned to the back cover and removed a single photograph. It showed a younger Brenda, maybe 40, strong-jawed, clear-eyed, in full surgical scrubs, standing with her team in front of the Nairobi Continental Medical Institute. She was smiling. Behind her, a banner read WHO, Commendation for Excellence in Emergency Obstetric Care. Dr. Brenda Underwood, 2009. Evanston took the journal with both hands, the way you hold something that deserves more care than you can give it. She turned the pages slowly. Her eyes moved across the diagrams, the annotations, the surgical notes that were more detailed and more precise than most published papers she had peer-reviewed in 30 years at Johns Hopkins. She looked up at the room. This woman is not a vagrant. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 3 decades separating competence from pretense and had never once gotten it wrong. She is Dr. Brenda Underwood. She created the Underwood maneuver, a technique taught in obstetric residency programs across 14 countries. She has more hands-on experience with vasa previa deliveries than every person in this room combined, including me. The murmurs spread like fire through dry grass. Specialists pulled out phones. Doctor. Morris typed her name into a search engine, and the results loaded in seconds. Journal articles, citation indexes, a conference photograph from Kampala, a profile on the WHO's Global Health Workforce Database. Everything matched. Everything confirmed what was standing right in front of them. The woman they had called a vagrant, a beggar, a delusional street person, was one of the most accomplished obstetric surgeons on the planet. Dr. Feldstein, the same man who had laughed loudest at the gate, who had joked about janitors performing brain surgery, stared at his phone screen and did not look up. His face had gone the color of old concrete. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. And Garrison Caldwell, the great Caldwell, the $250,000 man, the gatekeeper who had told Brenda to shut her mouth and crawl back to whatever hole she came from, stood against the far wall with his arms at his sides. The color had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a man watching his own career flatline on a monitor. He opened his mouth. What came out was not an apology. It was the last defense of a man whose fortress had just been demolished from the inside. This doesn't change the fact that she is not licensed to practice medicine in the state of California. The room turned to him. 11 specialists, 3 nurses, 1 billionaire. Every pair of eyes carried the same expression: disgust. Quiet, certain, and irreversible. Ted Bellamy stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice was granite dragged across glass. Dr. Caldwell, my wife is hemorrhaging. My children are dying, and you are standing there talking about paperwork. He paused. She operates right now or God help me, I will end you. Caldwell looked at Ted. He looked at Brenda. He looked at the 11 colleagues who would not meet his eyes. Then he did the only thing he had left. He stepped back, pressed himself against the wall, and said nothing. Brenda turned away from him. She had already forgotten he existed. She looked at Nurse Dwyer. She looked at the monitors. She looked at Vivienne, pale and trembling on the operating table, barely conscious, both hands wrapped around her belly as though she could hold her children inside by will alone.
"Let's begin," Brenda said, and the room obeyed. Brenda stepped to the operating table, and the world shrank to the size of a human body. She looked down at Vivienne Ashford Bellamy, 32 years old, 34 weeks pregnant with twins, blood pressure dropping, skin the color of candle wax, both hands still wrapped around her belly in a grip that said what her mouth could not. Please. Brenda placed her hand over Vivienne's, not as a doctor,
As a woman who understood what it meant to hold on to something precious while the world tried to take it away. My name is Brenda. I know you're scared. I need you to trust me. I have done this before, and I am going to bring your babies into this world alive. Both of them. Vivian's eyes found hers, glassy, terrified, searching for something solid to hold on to. She found it. She nodded. A single tear ran down her temple and disappeared into her hair. Brenda turned to the room. The surgeon was in control now. Every trace of the overpass, the torn coat, the security gate, the laughter, all of it vanished. What stood in its place was a woman who had commanded operating rooms across 4 countries, who had delivered babies by lantern light during power outages in Nairobi, who had performed emergency cesareans in field hospitals with equipment that these specialists wouldn't recognize as medical instruments. She had done this with less. She could do this with more. Nurse Dwyer, set the Doppler to 3.5 megahertz and position the transducer on the lower left quadrant. I need continuous, real-time vascular imaging throughout the procedure. Do not adjust the angle unless I instruct you to. Dwyer moved immediately, no hesitation. Dr. Morris, you're my first assist. I need you to retract. When I open the uterine wall, you retract laterally and hold. Steady hands. No repositioning without my command. Morris nodded. His skepticism from an hour ago was gone, replaced by something far more useful: respect. I need a second set of microvascular clamps, Yesargal or equivalent, sub-millimeter jaw width, and a 6-0 proline suture on a taper-cut needle for vascular repair if we encounter a bleeder. A surgical tech scrambled to locate the instruments. They hadn't been prepared. Brenda had known they wouldn't be. This team had been planning a standard cesarean, not the procedure she was about to perform. She picked up the scalpel. She paused for one breath. Not hesitation, but calibration. The way a concert pianist pauses before the first note. Then she began. The first incision was not where any of the 12 specialists expected it. Instead of the low transverse cut across the lower uterine segment, the textbook approach, the safe approach, the only approach any of them had ever been trained to use, Brenda went high. She opened at the fundus, the top of the uterus, in a lateral arc that avoided every mapped vessel on the Doppler screen. The monitor showed her blade passing between vascular structures with millimeters of clearance on either side. The room held its breath. She reached the amniotic sac of twin A. She opened it with a controlled puncture, suctioned the fluid, and reached inside. Her hands moved with a fluidity that comes only from repetition. Not 10 times, not 20 times, but hundreds of times. in conditions that would have made every doctor in this room quit medicine. She rotated the baby. She guided the head. She lifted. Twin A emerged, purple, glistening, silent for one eternal second, and then screamed. A furious, full-lunged, unmistakable declaration of life. The APGAR timer started. Color returned to the infant's skin within seconds. Heart rate, strong. Respiration, strong. The neonatal team took the baby and moved to the warming station. One breath of relief rippled through the room. Morris exhaled. Dwyer whispered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer. But Brenda did not pause. She did not celebrate, because the Doppler screen had just changed. Twin B's heart rate dropped. 110, 90, 80, 72. The alarm triggered, a high-pitched, two-tone scream that cut through the room like a blade. The feeding artery for Twin B had shifted during Twin A's extraction. It was now pressed directly against the uterine wall at a position that made standard extraction impossible. The vessel sat exactly where Brenda needed to reach. Any contact, even the brush of a fingertip, would rupture it. And at 72 beats per minute and falling, Twin B had less than 3 minutes before the heart stopped entirely. This was the moment, the one that separated textbook knowledge from surgical genius, the one that no amount of money, prestige, or board certification could buy. From the observation window, Caldwell watched. He whispered to the nurse beside him, just loud enough to be heard. "She can't do this. The vessel is in the extraction path. It's over." Brenda closed her eyes. 3 seconds. The room was silent, except for the cardiac monitor counting down a baby's life in descending numbers. 68. 65. When she opened her eyes, there was nothing in them but absolute, terrifying calm. The calm of a woman who had stood at this exact threshold before and had never once stepped back. Nurse Dwyer, reposition the Doppler probe to 35 degrees lateral. Hold it there. Do not move your hand, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear. You do not move. Dwyer adjusted. Her hand trembled once, then locked. Steady. Dr. Morris, retract the uterine wall 2 centimeters superior. When I say now, apply counterpressure at the fundus, firm and sustained. Not before I say it, not after. Morris repositioned. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles in his temples pulsed. Brenda picked up the scalpel. She leaned forward. The Doppler screen showed the 2 fragile vessels, Twin B's lifeline, running parallel, less than 4 millimeters apart, with the baby trapped behind them. 4 millimeters. The width of 2 matchsticks, the margin between life and death. She began the Underwood maneuver. The incision was lateral, not a cut so much as a controlled parting of tissue, guided, millimeter by millimeter, by the Doppler image on the screen beside her. She moved the blade between the 2 vessels the way a person threads a needle in the dark, by feel, by instinct, by the memory stored in her hands from 31 previous lives saved in operating rooms with worse equipment, worse lighting, and worse odds than this. The room did not breathe. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sounds were the cardiac monitor, 60, 58, 55, and Brenda's voice, calm and low, issuing commands like a metronome. Retract. Hold. Now. Counterpressure. Morris pressed. The uterine wall shifted a fraction. The safe corridor widened by 2 millimeters. It was enough. Brenda reached through the incision,
Her fingers found the baby, small, still, positioned posterior with the cord wrapped once around the torso. She did not rush.
Rushing killed babies. She unwound the cord with one hand while stabilizing the vessel field with the other, a maneuver that required ambidextrous precision that most surgeons could not perform on a mannequin, let alone on a living patient with a clock running out. She rotated twin B. She guided the head through the incision. She lifted. Silence. The baby did not cry. Brenda held the infant in both hands, tiny, blue-gray, limp. She suctioned the airway. She stimulated the feet. She rubbed the sternum with 2 fingers in small, firm circles. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. 4. A gasp. Then a cough. Then a cry. Thin at first, then growing, then full and furious and alive. Twin B screamed as if angry at the world for making her wait. The cardiac monitor stabilized. 70, 90, 110, 130. Strong, steady, alive. The operating suite erupted. Nurse Dwyer dropped the probe and covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing. "Doctor!" Morris stepped back from the table, pulled off his mask, and stared at Brenda with an expression that would stay on his face for the rest of his life. The neonatal team rushed forward. Machines beeped in celebration instead of warning. Through the observation window, Ted Bellamy dropped to his knees. His forehead touched the glass. His shoulders shook. The billionaire, who had built an empire on control and certainty, was weeping like a child in a hallway, and he did not care who saw. Brenda closed the incision. Her sutures were meticulous, small, even, unhurried, each one placed with the same care as the first. She checked Vivian's vitals, blood pressure stabilizing, hemorrhage controlled, pulse steady. She removed her gloves. She placed one hand gently on Vivian's forehead and leaned close. "You have 2 beautiful daughters. They're strong. And so are you. You're going to be just fine." Vivian reached up with a trembling hand and pressed Brenda's palm against her cheek. She held it there. No words. No words were needed. Just one woman holding the hand of another woman who had saved everything that mattered. In the observation window, Caldwell stood alone. No one stood near him. No one looked at him. He stared through the glass at the woman he had called filthy, delusional, a vagrant. The woman who had just accomplished what he and 12 of his peers could not. And for the first time in 22 years of practice, Garrison Caldwell had absolutely nothing to say. The operating suite fell quiet the way a battlefield falls quiet. Not with peace, but with the stunned silence of people who have just witnessed something they will never be able to explain. Brenda stood at the scrub sink, washing her hands with the same 30-second precision she had used before the surgery. Water ran pink, then clear. She dried her hands. She folded the towel. Every movement unhurried, as though she had nowhere else to be, because, for 15 years, she hadn't. Dr. Morris approached first. He extended his hand with the slow, deliberate reach of a man offering something he should have offered hours ago. "That was the most extraordinary surgery I have ever witnessed. 30 years of practice, nothing comes close." Brenda shook his hand. "Thank you. Nothing more." Dr. Evanston stood at Brenda's side, then turned to face the room. Every specialist, every nurse who had watched this woman be mocked and threatened with arrest, and said, loud enough for all to hear, "I have taught obstetrics for 30 years, trained over 400 residents. Tonight, I was the student." One by one, specialists stepped forward. Handshakes, nods, quiet words from men and women confronting the fact that they had stood beside brilliance and almost let security drag it away.
Caldwell did not step forward. He packed his bag in the corner with the mechanical movements of a man on autopilot. His hands, the same hands that had gestured at Brenda with a coffee cup and called her filthy, fumbled with a zipper. He walked toward the exit. Ted Bellamy blocked the door.
He did not raise his voice. You almost let my wife die because your pride was bigger than your oath. Carry that every day for the rest of your life. Caldwell left without a word. No one watched him go. Brenda walked alone to the neonatal suite. Through the glass, two tiny girls lay in warming bassinets, breathing, alive, wrapped in white blankets. She pressed her fingertips against the glass and stood there for a long time. For the first time in 15 years, Brenda Underwood allowed herself to cry. Sunrise broke over the Bellamy estate like a wound healing in real time. Vivian was awake. Both daughters lay against her chest, twin A on the left, twin B on the right, their tiny fingers curling around nothing, their lungs drawing air as though breathing were the simplest thing in the world. Ted sat on the edge of the bed, one hand on his wife's shoulder, the other resting on the head of the daughter who had almost never existed. He looked like a man who had been taken apart in the night and reassembled slightly differently. Quieter, softer, permanently aware of how close he had come to losing everything. He asked Vivian a single question. How do we make this right? Within 48 hours, Ted Bellamy's legal team filed a formal inquiry into the California Medical Board's handling of Dr. Brenda Underwood's licensure applications. What they found was not an isolated case. It was a pattern. Over the previous decade, 73 foreign-trained physicians had applied for obstetric licensure in California. Of those, 61 were trained in Africa, South Asia, or the Caribbean. 54 were physicians of color. The average processing time for their applications was 31 months. The average for American-trained white applicants with comparable credentials? 4 months. 22 applications from foreign-trained doctors had been flagged as incomplete with no explanation. 11 had been lost entirely. Brenda's was among them. Not once, but 3 times. The findings went public. The Los Angeles Times ran it front page. CNN picked it up the same afternoon. By the end of the week, the story had a name on social media. Hashtag Justice for Underwood. It trended for 9 consecutive days. Ted established the Underwood Fellowship, a $50 million fund dedicated to supporting foreign-trained physicians navigating the American licensure system. The fellowship provided legal representation, exam preparation, housing assistance, and direct advocacy with state medical boards. In its first year, it would help 38 doctors from Nigeria, Kenya, Haiti, India, and the Philippines receive the licenses they had been denied. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center offered Brenda a position, Director of Obstetric Innovation, a role created specifically for her, with full institutional recognition of her Nairobi credentials, her published research, and her 31 case record. She accepted. On her first morning, she walked through the hospital's main entrance carrying the same leather satchel, but this time she wore a white coat. Embroidered on the chest in navy thread, Dr. Brenda Underwood. Nurses she had never met stopped to shake her hand. A resident asked for her autograph on a copy of the East African Journal of Obstetric Surgery. She signed it without looking at the page. Her eyes were on the labor ward ahead, already scanning, already calculating, already doing what she had been born to do. Dr. Garrison Caldwell did not fare as well. The medical board investigation revealed that he had filed formal objections against 3 foreign-trained physicians seeking hospital privileges at institutions where he held influence. All 3 were women of color. His objections cited incompatible training standards, the
the same language that had been used to deny Brenda. His privileges at Pinnacle Women's Medical Group were suspended, then revoked. His malpractice insurance carrier dropped him. His $250,000 waiting list evaporated in a week. The last image of Garrison Caldwell was a photograph taken by a courthouse reporter. A man in a rumpled suit, sitting alone on a bench outside a disciplinary hearing, staring at the floor with the empty expression of someone who had finally run out of people to look down on. Vivian and Ted named their twin daughters. Twin A, the one who had come into the world screaming, they named Eleanor, after Vivian's mother. Twin B, the one who had made the whole world hold its breath, they named Brenda. Vivian wrote a letter. It arrived at Cedars-Sinai in a cream envelope, hand-addressed. Brenda read it alone in her new office, the leather journal open on the desk beside her. One line stayed with her longer than the rest. You gave me my children. You gave me my life. And you reminded me that the most extraordinary people are often the ones the world refuses to see. So what do we take from this? Talent does not come with a dress code. Skill does not carry a passport. And the most dangerous thing in any room is not ignorance. It is the arrogance of someone who believes they can measure another person's worth by the color of their skin, the condition of their clothes, or the address where they sleep at night. 12 of the most expensive doctors in America stood in a room with every piece of equipment money could buy, and they could not save one woman and 2 babies. A homeless woman walked in from under a freeway overpass with nothing but a leather journal and 30 years of knowledge in her hands. And she saved all 3. The system did not fail Brenda Underwood by accident. It failed her on purpose. It looked at her black skin and her African credentials and decided, without checking, without verifying, without caring, that she was not worth recognizing. And for 15 years, she lived under a concrete bridge, while the technique she invented was taught in medical schools she was not allowed to enter. That is not a glitch. That is a choice. And every person who made that choice, every bureaucrat who lost her file, every board member who stamped denied, every colleague who looked the other way, carries a share of those 15 stolen years. But here is what they could not steal: her hands, her knowledge, her calm under pressure, her ability to hold a scalpel between 2 blood vessels 4 millimeters apart and bring a dying baby into the world alive. They took everything else. They could not take that. Honestly, this story broke me. Like, she saved thousands of lives in Africa. And they told her she's nothing here. 'Cause she's black. 'Cause she's homeless. That's not a system failing. That's people choosing not to see. Don't be that person. Just don't. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever watched someone's talent get ignored because of how they looked? Your story matters too. Hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and remember, every person you meet is carrying something you cannot see. Thank you for watching. Hashtag Justice for Underwood. Hashtag Never Judge. Hashtag Hidden Talent. Hashtag Real Talent has no skin color.